Really delighted to see so many of you here. I'm just going to say a little bit about the Zoom etiquette and the form of the meeting. We're going to ask everybody to keep themselves on mute while we're talking. There will be a chance for breakout rooms when you'll have a chance to have a conversation. And we should let you know that the meeting this evening is being recorded. So there will be a recording available after the meeting. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, we'd like to recommend that you put your Zoom settings to speaker view, and that means that you'll see who's actually addressing the audience in the center of your screen. So usually on the Zoom screen, it's at the top right-hand corner. There's a button that says view, and you can put that onto speaker view. So the format of the evening is we're going to have a few small introductions. There'll be a chance for questions, and then there'll be breakout rooms, and then we'll have a closing session. And what we're going to recommend, because we're a large group this evening, is if you have any questions, could you put them into the chat? So at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a chat function. And if your questions are for any particular member of the panel, perhaps you could also indicate that in your question. Otherwise, we'll put the questions to the whole panel. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Carlo Lorenzi, the chair of the Confraternity of Pilgrims to Rome. So welcome, everybody. Carlo, you will have to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yep, lovely. Well, good evening, everybody.
You've gone on mute again,
Carlo. You're muted again.
I'm not sure how it is that it's muting. I think Mary's playing tricks on me this evening. So I was very disappointed to cancel last year's event at the last minute. So this year we thought, rather than risk another last minute cancellation, that we would, instead of running attempting an event in the autumn, we decided to run it as exclusively as an online experience. As Victoria's already said, we're looking at this annual conference in two parts. First is this evening, and the second, a very different type of event on the 16th of April. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the closing session. So back to this evening, it's 8 p.m. here in the UK. It's 9 a.m. tomorrow, in fact, in New Zealand, and 3 p.m. on the eastern seaboard of North America. I wish you all a very warm welcome to our event. And before I hand over to Victoria and David, who are our hosts for this evening, I wanted to briefly bring you up to date on a few things that the confraternity's been up to this year. Well, I don't need to tell you that 2020 wasn't like any other year, probably for anyone on the planet, and the CPR, of course, was no exception. We saw a 10% drop in our membership across the year, but this was more than offset by a healthy increase in our sales. We ran our first foray into a direct appeal to our supporters, and you very generously helped raise over £6,000 towards a new boat for Danilo, who provides the low-cost ferry service across the Po. And by the end of January, he had all 32,000 euros in place to purchase a new boat. And we heard from Brian earlier that, in fact, he's the boat is now ready. It seems to still be in a workshop somewhere, but so we're very pleased that we're able to help relaunch this new service. There's been a very positive reaction to our increased online events, including online socials, and this just being another example of those. So last year, we also saw an increase in international participation. Mary is representing us on the French FFBF, and I have been on the European EAVF. In terms of domestic links, we've made very strong links with colleagues in Kent, but also the Confraternity of St James and the British Pilgrimage Trust, as well as deepening our relationship with Canterbury Cathedral. And finally, we've completed a desk survey for a possible new walking route from central London to Canterbury. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to be going out ground truthing another section of it. So fingers crossed that we're able to attract some funding for the development of this route. And thank you to all of you that very generously took your time to respond to our online survey. We continue to work on your behalf. We have no property, as many of you know. We currently don't employ staff, and we deliver all our services via volunteers and trustees. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them all on your behalf for all that they do. We're still looking for a couple more trustees, so let me know if any of you are interested. So with no further ado from me, let me hand you back to, no, I'm not going to hand you back to anybody. I'm going to introduce Brian Mooney, my predecessor, who's going to kick off the first of the presentations on the Practical Pilgrimage panel. Over to you, Brian.
Carlo, thank you very much indeed. And is it wonderful to see so many familiar friends out there and some new faces too. Excellent. As Carlo said, my name is Brian Mooney, and I am a self-confessed serial long-distance walker. And I have the unusual distinction of probably being one of the only people alive who's actually walked from Rome and back, walked to Rome and back. I say the only person alive because obviously in the Middle Ages, that was the only way you could get there. You had to walk both there and back. There was no Ryanair. And it was because of Ryanair that in fact I decided to do the return journey, because I was challenged by a friend who said, well, in the old days, pilgrims didn't have the chance of flying back by Ryanair. They had to walk back. So I thought, well, I would do both. So I have walked both ways, and I won't waste time talking about those tonight, but I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can. It will strike you immediately, of course, that a lot of my walking was done, I'm afraid, well over 10 years ago. So things would have changed a little bit. But walking is what unites almost all of us tonight. And of course, it's absolutely in our DNA to long distance walk, and walking and pilgrimage also. The numbers undertaking pilgrim walking all over the world in different religions is really quite phenomenal. But the thing I want to talk to you about very briefly is the thing that makes me walk, which is anarchy. And I want to sort of, in a sense, introduce you to my golden mantra for walking, which is that there are no rules. And if you like, walking is the last human activity, or almost one of the last human activities, which is not in some form or other controlled. There are no rules for walking. We can do more or less what we want. We can walk as far as we want within reason, and we can walk more or less within reason where we want. And so I have a few, not rules, but a few sort of bits of advice, if you like, which I'd like to share with you. And these are coming up now. I'm not going to read them all to you, but if the screen operates on time, you should get a few tips. There we are. And they're really totally basic and straightforward. And I can't emphasize more the importance of traveling light. And by that, I mean 5, 6, 7 kilos max, unless, of course, you're camping. Again, there are no rules, but I love setting out early. I like walking into the dawn. I like doing 12 miles, or if you want, 20 kilometers by midday. I like to finish early, have a siesta. I relish hills. Why? Because all of us at a certain age, and most of us who end up doing the Via Francigena do it in middle to late life, maybe potentially have knee problems. And nothing is better for knees than walking up hills. So actually you should love your hills. Straightforward things like carrying a compass, using maps, obvious. I always like to say that long distance walkers do it in a straight line. And so if you read a map and you see some devious sort of circuitous route, the tendency is, if you're trying to get and travel a long way, to take as straight a line as possible. Check the exit every night wherever you stay. Make sure you know how to get out the next day. And then don't obsess about water. I'm always astonished by the number of people who walk across relatively flat Europe, worrying about how much water they should take with them. If you're climbing the high altitudes, and I've been on Everest, I know what I'm talking about here, then you do need to keep the liquid going to avoid problems with edema and so on. But quite frankly, even over the Grand Saint Bernard, you do not need to carry gallons of water with you. You're not going to die of dehydration, or we're not going to dehydrate in continental Europe. And then the other thing I say, which is slightly sort of sometimes unpopular, I say, you know, forget off-piste tourism. If you're walking a long distance, see what you see chemin faisant on the way, but don't go off and suddenly start exploring churches and museums that are a long way off your route, because you can do that another time. Concentrate on the thing in hand, which is the long distance walk. That's me in a nutshell, and look forward to answering any questions you have later on. Thank you. And I will now hand over to sunny New Zealand, to Auckland, where Victoria will be telling you about her own take on the Via Francigena. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Brian. I'm a total techno peasant, so I'm not sure how everything works. This thing is frozen several times, so if I go vacant and look at you and my mouth is moving but nothing's coming out, it's a problem. I was asked to talk about the practicalities of walking, and I would start with one thing. The main thing is you need to have the best possible pack and the lightest pack you can manage, and the best possible footwear that you can manage to afford. So spend time and money asking advice to get the best of those. I walk in gingy socks. There's a pocket for each toe, and that stopped me from getting blisters. I carry this thing, which is like a plug. It covers any hole. It's about 8 centimeters in diameter. Lots of places don't have plugs. I carry a stretchy line with nappy pins on it for hanging up my clothes. As far as walking goes, I'm with Brian. Keep it in a straight line, but don't wear those things in your ears that block out the nature around you, even if it's the cars or the trucks. You're not going to be back that way again, or very unlikely. So please don't walk with music in your ears. Let your brain just wander through the terrain as you walk through the terrain. Touch, smell, look, get down on your knees. On one walk, a part of the Via Francigena, I looked down and there was a tiny orchid. The flower would have been about 1/2 centimeter across. If I'd been head up wandering around, music in, I wouldn't have even noticed it. So just enjoy the various aspects of the walk that you're doing. Mental, it can be tough at times, but that day will end and tomorrow's another day. So all you have to do every day is get up, eat, walk, eat, drink, walk, come to bed for the night. Don't worry about your bed, you will get there. I was on the Via Francigena 17 days into my walk when my friend decided to go AWOL. And so I didn't have a phone because we'd agreed to share with hers. And I thought I could go home or I could go on alone and see what happened. And I went on alone and I got to Rome 79 days later. I used booking.com. At times, I found that not one of the email addresses responded to my emails. So I would get to a town, have a look around, but going close into a town, I would just check out the old sheds, the groves of trees in case I had to spend the night there. Just get up and go again the next day. The day will end and you'll have had an amazing experience, well worth doing. Anything else? Spiritual, I was asked to think about. Well, I just say, contemplate the fluff in your navel and you'll get a great experience just from that, because it takes your mind off all the other things that you might be worrying about. As for eating, I carried a bag of muesli in my backpack for the whole way with a small pot that I could tip it into and add some water if I got really hungry. So you will not starve. And as Brian says, don't worry about the water. However, here in New Zealand, though, I'm contemplating doing another trail, which there's days of 7 to 10 days where there's not much water and not much food, so you have to carry a bit more, but not as my experience in Europe. So just go with it. Yeah, that's all I can say. Go with it. It will happen at the end. You'll get to the end of a day and have somewhere to put your head down and you get up the next day. And that's about it from me. And so I'm going to hand over to David. David, your turn.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Vicky. And thanks everyone for coming today. It's a real treat to see you, and I'm very pleased to be participating on this panel. I walked my pilgrimage to Rome in 2018. I had graduated from a master's degree in medieval literature about a year before. So I had I had an interest in medieval culture, but apart from that, I think I just wanted a bit of an adventure, really, and certainly the Via Francigena gave me that in spades. I certainly did the pilgrim route on a bit of a shoestring, which I think is something that pilgrims are often interested in terms of budgeting. So I camped for quite a lot of the way in France and Switzerland, so I'm very happy to talk about that if other people are interested in doing that. As is the way with these panels, people are experts of their own pilgrimage, tend to disagree. I ended up carrying a pack of 21 kilos, so have very much not taken the advice of my venerable colleagues, but maybe I was foolish for doing so. I did have some quite severe blisters, etc., in the first month or so. It's a real pleasure to see two people on this Zoom who I think really encapsulate an extraordinary experience of the Francigena for me. So I just want to say hi to Danny and Andrea. They met me in Italy. I think it was in the village of Cero, and you were both putting up signs for the Francigena, and we had a chat. Andrea took my enormous backpack and swapped it for his tiny one and walked it on to the next town. But it was such a beautiful experience, and so perfect in capturing those magical experiences you have of meeting people. So it's wonderful to see them here, and it's just, yeah, it is something about the Francigena that I think is so true, that it's those kind of those moments and those experiences of meeting strangers and becoming friends. Andrea said something to me that I think, or asked me a question maybe that I think again was very important. He said, you wouldn't have walked this far if you didn't want to change something about your life, which I think was very profound and indeed true. It was for me certainly a life-changing event. So good to see you, Danny and Andrea, and that's my sort of introduction. I look forward to receiving your questions.
Brilliant. Well, three very lovely distinct takes on the Via Francigena. So you can carry anywhere between 7 and 21 kilos. We were reminded to be mindful, to not have music in our ears, and to really be present. I loved Brian's idea that actually being a pilgrim and a walker, we're at the height of our evolutionary journey. That's a lovely thought, and great, as David's just indicated, these connections that we build with fellow pilgrims. So we've got one question in the chat, and that is about the similarities and differences between the Camino and the Via Francigena. But first of all, I'm just going to invite Brian to say something. Brian, you're muted.
I was going to volunteer to answer that question. So yeah. Let me step back and would you like me to go ahead and answer it?
Go ahead. Yes, yeah, do.
I think it's very relevant. I always say to people I have done the Camino all the way from England and all the way back as well. I've done the there and back. And I always say to people that when you change gear from the Camino to the Via Francigena, it's a little bit like arriving at the old airport desks in those days when these things happened, and being upgraded to business class. You know, the Via Francigena is an altogether different, superior experience, but it's far, far more challenging in that it is less organized, less well-trodden. The infrastructure is not in any sense as extensive as you would find, particularly on the 30 days across northern Spain. So you have to be more resilient, more prepared for, you know, sorting yourself out, if you like. And, you know, it's across 4 countries as opposed to 1 country. So it is altogether a tougher experience, but infinitely, to my mind, more rewarding. And I hasten to say, still gracefully uncrowded. There's something about the Camino, which I crossed it walking back from Madrid to London some years ago, and I sat almost in despair as I watched this sort of line of lecky pole-driven pilgrims, head down, often with their earphones on, despite Vicky's suggestions that they shouldn't. And I felt to myself that this has just become a sort of an industrial sort of travelator. I mean, very, very sad. You'll get none of that on the Via Francigena. You could walk for several days on the Via Francigena in a little bubble and not actually cross another pilgrim. So it is still, in that sense, quite a lonely experience. Thank you, Vicky.
Yeah. David, have you done the Camino to Santiago?
No.
No. Okay. And what about Vicky? Have you walked to Santiago? Lost Vicky on my screen. Maybe her internet fell out. So another question that's come up from Liv is about planning or not planning. So perhaps David, maybe you'd like to speak to that question. How much did you plan ahead?
Absolutely. I think a big part of the joy is for me not planning. I know a lot of people find a lot of comfort in or find it quite important to have kind of plans and routes. I think there's certainly some pleasure in being able to see the options in front of you, but certainly being able to keep your options open, and certainly a bit of Brian's anarchy is something that I certainly valued very much. I think it is probably worth saying that similar to what Brian was saying, my understanding of the Camino is that you can sort of pitch up somewhere. I think there are busier stretches and quieter stretches along the Francigena, particularly depending on the season. Planning a day ahead or a couple of days ahead and giving a phone call is to some degree probably courteous to the people who are there, and you might end up arriving in a village that someone's taken the night off or whatever. So I would say that I would, if I were doing it again, I'd certainly stick to that kind of rule of ringing a day or so ahead. But apart from that, I very much enjoyed not having plans.
How about you, Brian? How do you relate to planning?
Well, there I have to admit that I'm an anarchist in the sense that I do like planning. It is often said that a true traveler is somebody like David who sets out in the morning without knowing where he or she will sleep at night. And in that sense, I would confess to not really being a true traveler, because I do like to organize accommodation. I must confess, I've tended to sort of slightly indulge on my walking, and I do go to not the 5-star hotels. I could see Mary smirking in the background there, but I tend to go to quite comfortable hotels, and so I will book in advance. But that is by no means a prerequisite. You do not have to do that. That is just my own particular anarchic way of behaving, if you like. But there is merit in both. It depends to some extent on how much you want to let yourself go, and how willing you are in the end to sleep in a barn if needs be. Although it is amazing how people on these long distance walks, a guardian angel, something always turns up in the evenings, and it's extraordinary how you end up not sleeping out rough when you may be most afraid that that will happen. So both systems work. Again, there are no rules. Thank you.
Thank you. So question from Paul Blackett to all the panelists is, what's one thing that you wish you had taken with you? So the implication is maybe it's something that you didn't take and you wish you had with you. So I can't see Vicky on my screen anymore. I don't know if her internet's fallen out, but perhaps we'll start with David and then Brian and see if Vicky reappears.
So as I said, I sort of packed the kitchen sink more or less. So in terms of what I would have wanted to take with me, I really think I can't imagine anything I didn't take. I was carrying around 1.5 litres methylated spirits to light my stove with. So I sort of had all bases covered, as it were. There's probably a few things I wish I hadn't taken, to be quite honest with you. Is there anything that I'd missed? No, honestly, I was foolish, frankly.
So Brian, with your 7 kilos, you must have jettisoned quite a lot of things.
I travel super light, and every year I set out, I travel even lighter. The one thing that I've often found that I've had to buy from a chemist is it's extraordinary how often you can cut yourself, graze yourself, and it's always useful to have a little tube of Savlon. And on several occasions, I've actually had to sort of pull into a pharmacy and buy something. So that's the one thing. I'm talking about a tiny tube, not a grown-up tube, a sort of a baby tube of Savlon. But no, I mean, I absolutely go for, again, not having the problem of camping and therefore carrying all the gear with me. I go for, de minimis. And so there was nothing. Things like shampoo, for example, where you always find those in the hotel if you're again staying in a hotel. So you just don't have to carry this stuff with you. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, the question specifically for you, Brian, which was about coming back from Rome. So given the weather concerns and crossing Switzerland and so on, how long did you have to wait before you made your return journey?
Well, I have to confess, and I'm sorry, I should have made that clear, that the return journey was not contiguous. I did fly back from Rome, and it was when sitting down in my kitchen having supper with some friends, I was challenged that pilgrims didn't have the luxury of flying back from Rome. That it was the following year I flew back out to Rome to complete the journey. So I didn't do it literally back to back. So thank you for picking me up on that.
Lovely. Well, we've touched on it a little bit in terms of guardian angels and providence and whether you stay in a hotel or a barn. But Jen has asked about the question of not actually booking your accommodation. Can you just turn up? So I wonder, perhaps Brian could speak to that, because you didn't have a tent. Did you always find somewhere?
Well, the answer is you can on the Via Francigena more or less within reason, but I think others would perhaps be better qualified than me, because I always booked. Whether you can turn up, I suspect the answer is yes. You'll always find accommodation, and with the numbers still relatively modest, the numbers walking the Via Francigena long distance are not anything like approaching the sort of industrial quantities you're getting on the Camino. So unlikely not to find somewhere to stay. So yes, you could do the whole thing without booking if that was your mind. But there is something quite comforting about setting off in the morning, knowing if you've got 25, 30, 35 kilometers to walk, that at the end of the day, you've got a shower and a bed, guaranteed, because you can waste a lot of time. And you arrive in a village and you say, is there somebody? Oh yes, there's the hotel, it's 5 kilometers away. Well, that's nothing if they've got to drive 5 kilometers. If you've got to walk another 5 kilometers, it adds a little bit to the challenge of the day, but it's doable.
Lovely. Now I think Vicky has rejoined the meeting. So maybe Vicky, if you could unmute, and then we can see where you are. Are you with us?
You were talking to me. Sorry, I have been totally lost in outer space till my daughter came back to collect me down, move me downstairs to another location.
Oh, well, it's lovely to see you back with us. We were just talking about the business of booking accommodation in advance or just turning up. So I wondered what your experience was of doing that.
I did both. Sometimes I used booking.com and I found it excellent. And sometimes if I knew the town was likely to have a tourist office, information office, I would go there and ask them for help. And I was amazed at the number of accommodation places, usually 1 and 2 star hotels, that would accept me and give me a discount for being a pilgrim. I was really impressed. Not once did I not have somewhere to put my head down, although one night was scary because the place that was in the book I was using was actually closed to pilgrims, and it was about 6 o'clock at night. But someone knew someone who knew someone, and they got a key, and I slept in the foyer while everyone else did everything else they wanted to do. Don't worry about the accommodation. It might cost you, but you will find somewhere to put your head down each night.
Lovely, thank you. There was a question about speaking Italian. Maybe I'll put this one to David. How was it sort of getting, campsites and finding your way with the, with speaking Italian or French or whatever you had to do?
Yeah, I would say it's not impossible to get by just with English, but it's certainly extremely helpful to have at least a kind of basic level. I mean, I crossed the my French is okay. I crossed the Great St. Bernard Pass and arrived in Italy and went into a bakery and suddenly realized I couldn't buy anything because of my complete lack of Italian. So I very quickly listened to about 12 hours of some kind of audio book of teach yourself Italian, and managed with that for the rest of for the next 6 weeks, and I found that very helpful. So I would say learn a bit, and it will take you. It will be very helpful.
Okay, I just wanted to share something from the chat. We're obviously all in quite difficult and unknown territory with COVID, but Andrea Tagliaferri has put in the chat that, speaking from Italy, they would recommend that in this period we do book, because a lot of places may well be closed. So perhaps it might be slightly different from the experiences that our panelists had. We've got a question for Brian about the maps that you used, and how did you get hold of maps?
Well, for crossing France, I used the IGN series, which I used. The short answer is I used old-fashioned paper maps, which I don't think are necessary any longer. Now with iPhones, you can download maps, so you can really have them all in the palm of your hand. But the IGN, the 1 kilometer to 1 centimeter is a pretty good scale that will help you. And then the maps in Italy are not quite so good. They're not quite so detailed, but you can also get similar scale maps. And the advantage of having maps rather than just relying on, say, the Alison Raju or the other guidebooks, the Paul Chin, is that it shows you the sort of the context in which you're walking. And I think very often, and that's particularly the case of the Camino, people who walk on that little slither of line across northern Spain, they don't really know the country that they're in. It's sort of as if they're walking through a funnel. So maps, if you can look at the broad picture, they broaden out the context of where you are. But if you go to Stanford, I don't know where the question came from, but Stanford's in London is the sort of the mecca for purchasing maps, and they will provide anything you want or anything that's available.
Great, thank you. And for David, a question about campsites. Did you always manage to find a campsite, or did you end up sleeping rough sometimes?
There aren't that many campsites in France very close to the route. I'm not speaking on behalf of the confraternity here, because the law around wild camping in France and indeed Switzerland is not very permissive. But I did certainly rough and wild camp quite a bit. My habit was to just go into some woodland often and just kind of make camp there. Although I met a Dutch gentleman who would just pitch his tent in the middle of village greens every day, and he would camp 6 out of 7 days. On the 7th day, he would have a hotel. There are occasional campsites in France, particularly for the first few days. In the Pas de Calais, there are quite a lot, but certainly not enough to be in one every night. In Switzerland, it's a different story, and I would say it's so expensive to find any accommodation in Switzerland. Even the campsites are quite expensive, but there are some absolutely beautiful ones around Lake Geneva, which are an absolute treat to pitch your tent next to. And I think actually walking in Switzerland is a bit more built up than other areas. It's less rural, so using campsites there is certainly very useful. In Italy, I have to say I didn't camp very much at all, because again, quite a lot of the areas are slightly more built up. By no means all the time, but also by the time I got to Italy, it was incredibly hot, and I did usually want a shower, so I was generally in the hostels, the pilgrim hostels, which were obviously very good value.
There was a follow-up question there about whether you ever got permission from churches or landowners to use their land.
I didn't, but I know that is something some campers on the French Dinner certainly do. I think it's worth, there is a sort of app which is like Airbnb for someone's garden, where you can sort of, spend a few pounds renting someone's garden. But also, I think, if I was doing it again, it was something I'd certainly be interested in doing, is just sort of knocking on someone's door and asking if they wouldn't mind if I just, if it was a farmer or whatever. I'm sure many people would be quite amenable. That's definitely an option for sure.
Lovely, thank you. I was going to just rewind a bit, because Vicky missed the questions about the kit and packing. So I just wondered if we could ask you, Vicky, to comment on anything that you wish you'd packed, or how you went about deciding what to put in your kit.
As far as my kit was concerned, I kept it very, very basic, and you only need what you're wearing today, maybe something to wear tidy tonight if it's appropriate, and something to wear tomorrow. I wore running t-shirts because they wash out and dry very quickly. My socks didn't necessarily dry so quickly, but something I learned at boarding school was if you needed something dry for the morning, you put it in bed with you at night, and it dried out. I kept it a 35-litre backpack, so there was no way I could put something in just in case. You are walking from town to town, and the towns have shops and shops have stock. So if you really do need to replace something or get something extra, you can buy it. So as far as a pack is concerned, walking via Francigena, unless you're camping, you shouldn't need any more than a 35-litre pack. I know I'm quite small, so my clothes are small, but you shouldn't need any more than 35. I did take running shoes, and because I love running, and I love running in different places, but I eventually, quite early on, discarded them. In fact, I discarded them about day 14, and on day 17, they arrived back where I was staying that night. Someone, where we'd stayed, we said we were staying in our ass, and blow me down when I arrived there. There were my running shoes, running shorts, and running socks. So I had to give them away again. But there was nothing else. I just kept it to a very, very minimum. If I walked from one town to the next, no one was going to see that I wore the same clothes yesterday. Only I knew that. So keep it absolutely basic, absolutely minimum is my best recommendation.
And Vicky, while you're speaking, I just wondered, were you subject to the 90-day visa rule coming from New Zealand, or did that not apply?
No, I am subject to it.
Yeah, how did you manage that? Did you have to rush to?
No, but because I'm a distance runner, I was very fit. So I arrived in Rome 79 days after I left Canterbury. And then that time had 5 days rest. So I did quite long distances each day. Like Brian, I loved walking into the early morning before the sun rose, and carrying on that day. So I think my longest day was 47 kilometers. And it was quite tough. And I decided then I'd much rather run a marathon than carry a backpack for 47 kilometers. But it is possible to do it if you're reasonably fit. It is a problem if you're not getting that in that time.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Paul Blackett about the most memorable place that you stayed. So perhaps Brian would like to start on that one.
Well, I suppose I have a very soft spot for Danilo and the ferry over the River Po. So although not by any means the most scenic part of the Via Francigena, certainly for me, that's always been sort of almost sort of the central part of the mission. Memorably also would have been the Fidenza, seeing the frieze of the 12th century frieze of pilgrims, one of them showing a pilgrim with a cowl, very much like the logo that you see along the Via Francigena today. And then, of course, for all of us crossing the Grand Saint Bernard, walking up there, there is something really quite unique and special. Well, not unique, obviously, it's the highest inhabited place in Europe. Not high, of course, by comparison to Asia and other parts of the world, but very special. It's been in continuous habitation for centuries, and it had distinguished earlier visitors like you know, our chairman Carlo and Napoleon before him. So the Grand Saint Bernard is special. I think, but for me, the highlight is Danilo Parisi, because he has been engaged in the Via Francigena since its rebirth in the 90s, and has taken it upon himself as his sort of hobby, if you like, although it's become his life's work now, to reintroduce, to reinstate the ferry that links the two cities across the River Po. And he has had every pilgrim that's come his way sign his book. He's got this extraordinary register of, you know, it's a treasure trove of the names, the nationalities, the ages, the itinerary of the pilgrims who've gone his way. And I think he notched up his 10,000th pilgrim this summer, which is an astonishing thing to have done all the time, in the sense for the love of it. He doesn't make any money out of it. He just barely covers his costs. And it was wonderful that all of you members and dipped deep into your pockets to help him fund a replacement boat for his ferry that was vandalized during the earlier lockdown last year. So for me, Danilo, and those of you who have yet to walk the Via Francigena, you will find the experience crossing the River Po with him quite magical. Thank you.
David, how about you? What was your most memorable place to stay?
I'm going to beg some indulgence as well and say 3, because there are just too many to count, really. As Brian said, the crossing of the Great St. Bernard Pass is fairly extraordinary, particularly so I'm thinking, I suppose, about sleeping as well. Staying at the monastery is an extraordinary experience. The welcoming with the kind of the bowl of tea is amazing, and it was made even better by the fact I was woken up by the sound of Enya in the morning. That was for some reason the soundtrack that the monks had chosen to play at 8 a.m. So Enya made that morning better. The second place was this extraordinary medieval castle in Pantremoli, which they have turned into pilgrim accommodation, which was just a bizarre experience to stay in very cheaply. And yeah, had the place to myself. I remember the person, the hospitalier, telling me to don't forget to lock up the castle and pop the key back through the letterbox, which was quite fun. And the third place was a camping experience. It was a wild camping experience at Mount Valoria, which is the peak just next to the Cisa Pass. I thought I kind of got there when it was all misty, and I decided I'd kind of stay to see if the mist would clear. So I slept up on Mount Valoria overnight one night, and woke up in the morning to grazing horses around me, which was quite bizarre, but it was a fairly extraordinary morning as well. So those are my 3.
Thank you. And Vicky, how about you? What your most memorable place or places to stay?
Crawling up the snow to this Mount St Bernard Pass, because I didn't have poles, so I was using my fingers and did a few belly flops in the snow. Stepping out at the top and a man getting out of his car and saying to me, well, there wasn't snow here this time last year. And me thinking, well, I should have walked it last year. And then going down the other side and the wonderful wildflowers on the Italian side, just beautiful. And the other one was Lucca. I had a rest day there, so I stayed 2 nights and just wandering around all the streets. But I also got talking to a man who was a Roman man in a chariot, totally white, being a statue in the square. He stepped down and we chatted for a long time. And then about a week later, 2 South African women that I had met, we met up again and they said, oh, the chariot man in Lucca sends his regards and hopes you're doing well. And I thought that was just lovely. And Monteriggioni, sorry, I don't really pronounce it very well, but that was just a lovely, lovely place once all the tourists cleared out in the evening and it was just a square to wander around. I loved it. And those are my 3 favorite memories.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I can certainly imagine ourselves in all those beautiful places. Just wanted to share something that Karen's put into the chat.
Could I come back? And I just sort of didn't want to exclude, if I may, have an additional comment here about the favorite parts. I think the Val d'Orcia in sort of film set Tuscany has to be quite high up there. And then, of course, finally, when you rise up the little hill above St. Peter's in Rome and look down on Rome itself, on the Vatican, that, of course, is perhaps the most moving experience of them all.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just going to share Karen's point in the chat, which is something to think about when we're relying on providence or planning our journeys. She's asking, wouldn't it be more polite to call ahead to let people know you'd like to stay with them rather than just showing up? And she says many of the places she stayed weren't commercial hotels, so they're not just sitting around waiting for pilgrims, and it's helpful if they can plan meals. A little consideration for the locals would go a long way towards endearing the Via Francigena and pilgrims to the local people. So yeah, it's very, very much a two-way process. Yeah, Vicky, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, you can. Sorry, you can do that if you have a phone, but I didn't have a phone. All I had was my tablet to send emails. So yes, I agree that it would be polite to do that. However, on the other hand, I suppose if you just turn up and they say, I'm sorry, it's not convenient, end of story. If you don't, it's all good if you have a phone. And 100 years ago, they didn't have phones. Thousands of years ago, they didn't have phones to make bookings ahead, unless they could send a runner ahead who would say, we need a bed for the night. That's really where it is with me.
Yeah, okay. Did David or Brian want to comment on that? Brian, yeah.
I think it's a very sensitive point. I mean, there was a time when people used to expect the parish priests to sort of somehow roll out accommodation, and I was always very opposed to that, sort of arguing that why should a parish priest who's probably elderly and looking after dozens of parishes turn himself out to help middle-class people on middle-class holidays, which is to some extent, you know, let's be fair, what this pilgrimage is about. And as far as being polite to people, I think those on the Via Francigena, as in the Camino, who have locked in and engaged with the fact that they're on a revived pilgrim route, want to go out of their way to help. And they're willing to help whether you turn up late, early, raining, snowing, whatever, because that's what they are, they're giving. But to turn up and knock on someone's door and expect to be sort of, you know, if they're not in the business of running a hostel and so on, I think is a little bit absurd. I mean, that to my mind is carrying the expectations of hospitality too far. So one has to, you know, always be reasonable. You know, if the locals have got hostels or some sort of arrangement in place to look after pilgrims, they'll accept pilgrims whether they're booked or not booked, and they'll accept all comers. But I don't think we should be encouraging people to set off and, you know, roam through Italy, knocking on doors, asking for accommodation just because they're on the Via Francigena. That's not the way the world works any longer.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, I think points well made. I think it's fair to say also that another option is certainly, I suppose, particularly in Italy, it might also be. I'm thinking, I guess, specifically about pilgrim-specific accommodation as it exists in Italy at the moment. You can always, if you're going from one pilgrim hostel to the next these days, you could ask your host to ring ahead and let them know, or if you're walking with other people or whatever. But I mean, I think I also take what Vicky says. If someone says, if you I'm from Newcastle and Shy Ben's getting out up there. So if you show up and someone says we can't accommodate you, they can't accommodate you, and that's and then you're going to have to deal with it. So I don't think anyone's going to be terribly put out.
Right. We have a question from Paul about timing your pilgrimage, particularly with going over the Alps. Maybe Brian would like to start on that one. How did you work out the best time?
Well, that is crucial, and you'll see. I think Alison Raju is the one who focuses on this very much in her Cicerone guide. I mean, dear Alison, now dead, but very much the author of, to my mind, the best guide. And she points out that you've got to time your visit to cross the Alps, the Grand Saint Bernard, before the snow comes again in the autumn, and after the snow has melted in the spring. And that window is sometimes quite elastic, and it's sometimes fewer months than other years, and that dictates that you've in the end got to walk through Italy in the summer. So you have to accept the pleasure of walking across the Grand Saint Bernard, along with the scourge of a slightly hot summer. But guess what? In Italy, even when it's really hot, there's often a little bit of a breeze somewhere along the line. You know, you won't. You're not walking through the Negev desert. But anyway, there's the window. Unless you want to put on snowshoes or skis, and I've skied up the Grand Saint Bernard, you can do it in the winter, but that's not something that one would be recommending to too many members of the confraternity. It's not the business we're in.
Yeah, David.
I think that marks this as an official confraternity panel event, because that is the question that always comes up about the timing. So it's good to know that even in a virtual manifestation, we still are hitting that tradition. I know that Tim Redmond is on the call. If you want to, I think Tim has written a very, very encyclopedic blog post about the Great St. Bernard Pass and when to cross it and what to expect. So perhaps you can share that, Tim, and it is a genuinely very useful piece of writing peppered with his own fun anecdotes.
What about you, Vicky? You described not having poles and
No, I didn't walk with poles. I knew that probably on the second day I would lose them, so there's no point in buying some in the first place. It wasn't snowing, but I decided rather than go up the road, I'd like to follow up the Napoleon route. And of course, there was snow and it was icy. So yes, I just crawled up there, and every now and again put my fingers down into the snow to hold myself from sliding back down, and I got to the top. You can do it. But I can't, I'm trying to think when it was. I think I left Canterbury about mid-May, so it must have been June, late June that I arrived at the St. Bernard Pass. I can't really remember, can't work out the dates. Early July. I know that after that, as I walked down through Italy, it got hotter and hotter. But I was walking south and I just slowly acclimatized. So I would be quite surprised when I looked at some of those pharmacy signs which said it was 32 degrees or whatever. It just didn't seem like that because I'd got slowly acclimatized. It's doable. Just walk.
Lovely, lovely, simple message there. Just walk. I'm going back a little bit through the questions, and there were two relating to kit again. Anne asked whether Brian could share his packing list because you have the smallest kit, and then Alison was asking about sandals or flip-flops for the evenings. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
My packing list is very modest. I mean, literally a wick shirt, undershirt, an overshirt, pair of trousers, 2 pairs of socks, a few underpants, and that was it. Oh, and a fleece, and on top of that a waterproof, but a very light waterproof. So de minimis. Diaries, I think sort of my phone charger might have weighed more than my clothes. I do believe, though, in a pair of comfortable shoes for the evening, so one wants to get out of one's boots, and that's a matter of choice whether you use. I mean, the alpine climbers, they take flip-flops with them, but I wanted a bit more than that, so I did take a pair of sort of light slip-on trainers, if you like, into which I would slip to do my evening walk, stroll around the town where I was staying. But so absolutely de minimis. And it's extraordinary. I'm going to go on about this. It's very important. When I used to climb a lot, the guide I learned with, he used to sort of pick up my rucksack and said, well, you know, empty it. And then he'd tell me, well, fill it again with just half of what you've got, and then do the process again. And you'd be amazed at how you can reduce it to virtually nothing. As Vicky says, nobody's going to see you the next day in another town. And as long as you can wash your stuff at night, so it's washable and dryable, you just do not need anything with you. You're walking. It's not a fashion parade.
Vicky, do you want to add anything there? You talked about your jettisoning your running shoes and then they caught up with you. Any more thoughts about how to travel very light?
Well, I'm with Brian on it. Keep it simple. Don't carry an awful amount. I did carry flip-flops for the shower, and I did have another pair of very light shoes for walking around town because I hate wearing flip-flops. And other than that, I just had the shoes that I walked in each day and 2 pairs of socks. There is my packing list is actually on the Via Francigena website, which it can be adapted to whether it's male or female. I don't think many men would want to take a bra, but and I didn't want to take a shaving kit. So you just adapt it to what suits you, but keep it light and keep as few things as possible. That's less to lose as well if you forget to check under your bed or whatever it is in the morning. And you don't need much.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I've got a slightly different question here from somebody calling in on their iPhone, which is asking whether panelists would comment on whether their walk was for spiritual or other reasons. So perhaps David, maybe you'd like to start off on this one.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose it's sort of central to the idea of pilgrimage, isn't it? The idea of kind of spirituality, and I suppose the reasons why people do any kind of pilgrimage, especially if they want to call it a pilgrimage, are quite diverse. I suppose, just speaking quite candidly, I undertook mine probably not really grasping the full nature of kind of perhaps why I was doing it, or going forward with a particular kind of spiritual goal, but it certainly became a very spiritual experience for me, undoubtedly. I think, and something I talked, and I am a fairly religiously observant person, but I also think, speaking to people who aren't familiar with that, I also think, I suppose it's a little bit about what Vicky said as well, contemplating the fluff in your navel. It is just meditation for hours at a time during the day. You really, you whether or not that is related to whatever kind of divine being you might or might not believe in, certainly the nature of walking for a very long time each day means that you are alone with your own thoughts and whatever else might be out there. So I think it's well, for me at least, it inevitably became something very spiritual.
Thank you. So Brian, because you do a lot of long distance walking, I wondered, if a pilgrimage is very different from the other kinds of walks that you.
Well, I certainly concur with David there that walking does become spiritual, because it is a wonderfully calming experience. It is the closest we're ever going to get to nature. If you think about walking, it's one of the things I would say is that it's the way in which the first men and women journeyed across our planet. They were walking 3.5 miles an hour. We're doing much the same. So in that sense, it takes you right back, stretches right back to the sort of the birth of human civilization on the planet. And yes, there becomes something very spiritual about it, whether or not you do it for very specific religious reasons or not. There is a spiritual dimension. I personally am very drawn by following pilgrim routes, so sort of the footfall of prayer, if you like, the idea that one is following centuries of people who've come before you, sometimes in spiritual search, but not always. I've also come to the conclusion over the years that a lot of people, right back to the Middle Ages and even earlier, went on pilgrimages because they wanted to have a bit of a holiday. It's not just all penitential and sackcloth. So there is a sort of wonderful combination there of having a good time and at the same time being at one with nature, becoming part of the landscape. And that has to have a very, very powerful spiritual dimension, which, my goodness, you miss when you stop. When the walk comes to an end, you carry with you this sort of treasure of memories and sensations. And slowly it evaporates. And as it evaporates, of course, you build a desire to go on another walk. Thank you.
Vicky.
I know that these are described as pilgrim trails, but one needs to also realize that a lot of them were just for people to get from one village to the next or drive their stock from one village to the next. So animals and humans like taking the easiest route anywhere, and that's why a lot of these trails have developed. They're not just, they weren't necessarily originally all pilgrim trails. They were the means of people getting from one place to another. Sorry, that's the prosaic old Kiwi.
Great. And changing direction again, collecting stamps like you do on the Camino, and do you need 2 pilgrim passports? If so, Brian, would you like to respond to that one?
Well, it becomes quite compulsive, and one ends up with a sort of, a wonderful sort of book of stamps, and the day is not fulfilled and not completed somehow, not rounded off, unless you've found somebody to stamp your passport. And so, and it's a lovely memento. I would just like to go back to Vicky, and I totally concur that humans have been walking for generations for many reasons, but the Via Francigena does have, in the way like the Camino, does have a special sort of historical pilgrimage religious context, in that it was the route, more or less, I mean, the route, a wide sort of conglomeration of routes that converge, if you like, that led people from Northern Europe down to Rome on various pilgrim missions. So they're not just droving routes. I mean, there is definitely, particularly in the Via Francigena, a sort of historical pilgrimage dimension to it that is part of what we're following. Anyway, but as far as the stamps are concerned, I'll go and bring down from my bookshelf now a couple of examples to show you, but you carry on and I'll bring it in a few minutes.
Vicky, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I'm aware that that is a specific route that the Via Francigena follows, and I'm not just commenting on that. I'm commenting on a lot of the routes that people walk on trails in Europe, that they were trading routes as much as pilgrim routes to get people from one place to another, stock, whatever, from one place to another. I didn't mean to demean the value of the Via Francigena, but as a matter of interest, I started it because I like the challenge of doing long distance walking. And in the end, it became quite a spiritual experience for me as well. And all I wanted to do when I got back home was set out again, clean out my pack and go off again, which I did a couple of years later, but now we can't go anywhere. And that's just life. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, Brian. Oh, David, yeah, do you want to come in?
Sure, and Brian's doing a really good job of this. I think this is probably just the time to do a hard sell for the confraternity's merchandise. Go on, Brian. Do you want to take over?
Well, I was going to hold up a typical page. Hang on, if I can find one that has there. That's a typical page of.
Yeah, absolutely. So some great stamps there. So yes, certainly I think we sell a booklet which is particularly long. I think it's got space for approximately 100 stamps, which will allow you to get lots and lots in there. And then we also have a fold out credential which we've recently released, which also should get you all the way there. We have prided ourselves on releasing them to cover the entire route, so you shouldn't need two. Is the answer there. Great.
Okay, well, we're going to have one final question before we go into the breakout rooms, and that's the experience of dogs. As Paul has written, the subject of noisy dogs seems to be of concern to people in Facebook groups. Are they right to be concerned about the dogs? David, would you like to start?
It's hard to deny people's, I'm also like active on the Facebook forums, it's hard to deny people's anecdotes of that sound quite scary about dogs. I was actually bitten by a dog myself in France, but it was not of the type that people usually talk about. I had accidentally climbed over a fence into a farm, and a dog in a stable had come up and very gently snapped my ankle. But I would say, I think generally people are quite concerned about the dogs in the Italian hills, and they can be a bit scary. I have never personally had a problem with them, or I didn't when I was on the route. I understand there are very many different methods for protecting yourself. Brian, I think, will probably describe some of them.
Well, I would just, I can trump dogs by saying that I was not attacked, but sort of approached by a wolf, a lonely wolf once in southern Tuscany, which was quite an experience. But dogs, they can be unsettling, and particularly the big lone sheepdogs in Italy. I find usually if you stand your ground and talk softly to them, that they won't do you any harm. But I mean, that maybe is more luck than anything else. And it's jolly hard to stand your ground when a very vicious looking sheepdog approaches you. Generally, and increasingly, the Via Francigena is more and more being looked after by the local authorities in Italy. And one of the things that they are concerned about and have done a lot to ameliorate, if you like, is the issue of loose and stray dogs. So you'd be, on the whole, I think you'd be unlucky to be mortally or savagely wounded by a dog. And I don't think we've heard of anyone who's been seriously bitten. I like Dave, I've been snapped at, in France, fun enough, along a canal. And it's often the little dogs that get you, not the big ones. But they are a reality. Whether you have a lecky pole with you or not to ward them off, I don't know. I mean, that's one other possibility. A lot of people swear that the pole is the thing that saves them from the dogs. But I think you would leave tonight's and this morning's group meeting with the wrong impression if you imagined you were going to be sort of battling your way through armies of savage dogs. It ain't like that, and you could walk from one end of Italy to the other without ever encountering one, I promise you.
Vicky, do you want to add anything on the subject of dogs?
Well, I was brought up on a farm, so I don't fear dogs at all. And I did have an encounter with a couple of dogs at one stage in Italy in the hills. And I just stopped and talked to them, then started wandering off, and they wandered off behind me. I think the best thing with dogs is that you don't look like you're going to threaten them. And I think that's why little dogs often will bite, because you're such a big person and they basically can't even see above your knees. They just have these great big feet coming at them. So that's why I think why they are a little more likely to attack. No, don't fear dogs. Just move quietly, talk quietly to them, and you should be safe. But if you start running or threatening them, why shouldn't they threaten you back? You're bigger than them and they've got to protect themselves. Don't fear dogs.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much to our panelists for fielding such a variety of questions on so many different topics. So what we're going to do now is allocate everybody to breakout rooms. There should be about 4 of you in each room, and that's an opportunity to talk about what you've heard, compare experiences, talk about what you're hoping to do on the Francigena, and a little bit of etiquette. Try to allow everybody in the room to have equal time to talk. So I'm going to press a few buttons now, so you'll be whisked off into the breakout rooms. We'll do that for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for some closing words before finishing at 9:30.
Can I take my picture off?
Some interesting and enlightening conversations in the breakout rooms. So just for the final few minutes of the session, we're going to ask each of the panelists just to give a few closing words of inspiration or advice for all of us on our pilgrimages. And then Carlo is going to say a few words right at the end to close the session. So panelists, perhaps David, maybe you'd like to start and give us some lovely words to send us on our way.
Sure, of course. I haven't really thought of anything, so I'll just say something, I suppose. Yeah, just that the Francigena is an extraordinary road, as much as as Vicky was saying, it is a it's just a traffic route in a way. It's somewhere that people have taken cattle. It's somewhere that people have gone on very kind of distinguished journeys, but it just so happens to be extraordinarily beautiful in places, extremely boring in others, flat and hilly, too hot often, and ridden with mosquitoes in other places. But it really is certainly an absolutely extraordinary thing to do if you're planning on walking or traveling it in any way. So I just couldn't commend it to you any more highly, and can assure you that it will bring you unexpected and unknown joy and delight. So enjoy your pilgrimage if you have yet to make it, and I hope you have enjoyed this evening of recalling fond memories if you have already done it.
Lovely, thank you. Vicky, would you like to say anything?
To borrow a phrase from Nike, just do it. But do it mindfully, use all your senses, except take those earbuds out and just listen to nature. Enjoy the little things along the path. The big things will take care of themselves that are bothering you. At the end of the day, you'll have a bed, you'll have a meal, you might even have a wine or a beer, and the next day you'll get up and do it all again. You don't have to worry about answering the phone. You don't have to do any work. Someone else is going to clean up everything else. Just go out and be yourself for 100 days, 90 days, however long it takes you to do it, but just do it. And good luck to everyone who's going to do it.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, Vicky says it all, just do it. It is the king of walks. There's no better long distance pilgrim walk in Europe, and it will change your life in many ways that you do not expect. And whether you've done it or about to do it, all of us will feel there is some very special sense of community that comes from experiencing and engaging with the Via Francigena. So reach out, let it join you as much as you join it, and you will find the experience richly rewarding and life-changing. Thank you.
And huge thank you to our 3 panelists for all that information and sharing of experience. It's been really, really heartening and really lovely thing to have experienced. So just going to hand over now to Carlo to say a few words to close the first of these 2 virtual conference sessions. So I'm just looking for
Thank you,
him on my screen.
Victoria.
Yeah.
Am I unmuted? Great. Thank you very much, Victoria. If I could also support that notion of thanking our 3 panelists, David, Brian, and Vicky. Obviously, David and Brian I know very well. We work together. Vicky, it was a delight meeting you. And so pleased to have someone from the other side of the planet to join us this evening as a presenter. We've got lots of people from the other side of the planet who are there as members of the audience. Victoria, if I can also thank you. Excellent hosting, beautifully done. You've set the bar very high. I'm not sure how I'm going to manage this at our next event. And if I could also thank Mary Kirk and Paul Blackett for their work behind the scenes, because what you as a participant don't know is the sheer amount of work and the marketing to get all of this information out. Most of us won't be in a position to undertake our desired pilgrimage this year, but there's a lot we can still do. For example, training, keeping our legs in good condition, better preparation, learning about the route, attending these sorts of events, reading other people's accounts and various guidebooks. Think about what you hope to take with you. Brian and Vicky have given us an interesting list of things for us to consider in terms of what we're taking with us. But don't just buy it at the last minute, buy it early, test it out. You'll get better at it as you use it. And I think that's particularly true for footwear. And above all, prepare yourselves mentally for your pilgrimage. So in other words, why are you doing it? What do you want to get from the experience? Think about these things well in advance of the start, because we don't know when the Francigena is going to open, but I suspect when it does, we'll want to get out there as quickly as possible. A reminder that part 2 of this annual conference is the evening of the 16th, and we have Canon Emma Pennington from Canterbury Cathedral and Giovanni Caselli from the beautiful Italian medieval town of Arezzo. Again, my thanks to the confraternity team for putting this evening on, and to all of you, our participants and our members out there, for joining us for what has been a very informative and very enjoyable evening. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever it is that you are, and look forward to seeing you at part 2 in about a month's time. Good night, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, and thank you to everyone for organizing this. It was a fantastic experience.
Great day. Wonderful.